Imagine a love story born in the shadows, where every kiss is a betrayal and every secret could mean death. Kang Do-hyun was the son of the city's most feared Korean mafia boss. Han Ji-woo was the daughter of the relentless prosecutor sworn to bring him down. Their families were at war, their destinies seemingly opposed. Their connection defied everything they knew, forcing them to choose between family loyalty and an undeniable, perilous love. Their worlds were never meant to collide, but fate had other plans. What happens when the ultimate forbidden romance blossoms between two sworn enemies? Can love truly conquer all when the stakes are this deadly? Have you ever felt drawn to someone you absolutely shouldn't be? Now imagine that feeling amplified 1,000 times. This isn't just a story about love. It's a heart-pounding journey of impossible choices, dangerous secrets, and the lines they're willing to cross for each other. Prepare for a story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The air in the interrogation room is thick with the scent of rain and expensive cologne. On one side of the reinforced glass sits Kang Do-hyun, the son of a deadly Korean mafia boss. He is perfectly composed, his dark suit tailored to hide the scars of a life lived in the shadows. He is a man who controls the city with a whisper, yet here he is silent. Opposite him is Han Ji-woo. Her deep red dress is a jarring splash of blood against the cold, blue-toned concrete. She holds a file that could dismantle the Kangwai syndicate by sunrise. Evidence her father, the chief prosecutor, has spent 20 years dying to find. Their hands rise simultaneously, meeting at the glass. It isn't a gesture of aggression. It's a moment of mutual surrender. Do-hyun's eyes don't reflect the monster the world fears. They reflect a man who is tired of being alone. Ji-woo's hand trembles, her finger tracing the outline of his through the barrier. She was sent to break him, to find the red ledger and end his dynasty. But as their eyes lock in a silent confession, a terrifying realization takes hold. To save her father's legacy, she has to destroy the only man who has ever truly seen her. And Do-hyun, he is already deciding which of his family's laws he is willing to break to keep her breathing. The question isn't if they will be caught, it's who will pull the trigger first. Welcome to Seoul Syndicate Stories. Thank you if you are just joining us. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell so you never miss any story, give thumbs up, and share with others. Tell me where you're watching from. Every one of your clicks, your comments, and every bit of love you show helps us to keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. Find a quiet place to settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've probably never been before. Thanks for watching. The Grand Hyatt's ballroom was a sea of black masks and predatory wealth. But Han Ji-woo moved through the crowd like she was born for the gilded shadows. The silk of her deep red dress hissed against her legs, a defiant contrast to the monochrome tuxedos surrounding her. Her earpiece hummed with her father's voice, a cold, distant rasp reminding her that tonight wasn't about the glitter. It was about the blood beneath it. Target is at the far balcony, the voice whispered. Focus, Ji-woo. If he sees the wire, you're dead before you hit the floor. She didn't need the reminder. She felt him before she saw him. Kang Do-hyun stood near the marble railing, a glass of amber liquid untouched in his hand. He didn't wear a mask. He didn't need to. In this room, his face was the only authority that mattered. His posture was rigid, a statue of controlled power that seemed to repel the air around him. When he turned his head, his sharp jawline caught the light of the chandeliers, but his eyes remained in the dark. Ji-woo took a steadying breath, adjusting the strap of her clutch, the housing for the decryption device that would mirror his phone's data. She approached him not with the hesitation of a spy, but with the calculated grace of a woman who knew she was being watched. They say the most expensive items tonight aren't on the auction block, she said, her voice a low, melodic velvet as she came to a halt beside him. Do-hyun didn't turn. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating, until the ambient noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar. And what are you looking for, Miss Han? Art or a confession? Ji-woo's heart hammered against her ribs, but her expression remained a mask of porcelain calm. He knew her name. Or did he? I'm looking for the truth, she replied, stepping closer until she could smell the scent of cedar and cold iron that clung to him. But I suspect you don't deal in anything so transparent. Finally, Do-hyun looked at her. It wasn't the look of a criminal assessing a threat. It was the look of a man recognizing a mirror image of his own cage. He set his glass on the railing and stepped into her personal space. The height difference was an unspoken threat, his broad shoulders blocking out the rest of the ballroom. "Truth is a luxury people like us can't afford," he murmured. He reached out, his hand hovering inches from her shoulder, trailing down the line of her arm without making contact. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating, a dangerous lure. "You're trembling." "It's a cold room," she lied, her gaze locked on his. "It's a dangerous room," he corrected. His hand stopped at her wrist, his fingers circling the delicate bone. He didn't grip it. He simply held it, a gesture of permission that felt more intimate than a kiss. He leaned down, his breath ghosting against her ear. "My father is watching from the gallery. Your father is listening through that pearl in your ear. Tell me, Ji-woo, who are we performing for?" The air left her lungs. Her cover was blown before the first lot had been called. Yet he wasn't calling for the guards. He wasn't signaling his men to drag her into the basement. Instead, he pulled her closer, his thumb stroking the pulse point in her wrist where her heart was betraying every secret she held. "You should run," he whispered, his voice laced with a sudden, jagged edge of melancholy. "Before I decide to keep you." Ji-woo looked up at him, her lips parted, her mission forgotten in the suffocating weight of his proximity. She saw the internal conflict in the set of his mouth, the discipline of a monster warring with the instinct of a protector. Suddenly, a sharp crack of a gavel echoed through the hall, signaling the start of the main event. Do-hyun let go of her wrist, the sudden coldness where his hand had been feeling like a physical wound. He stepped back, his face hardening into the mask of the syndicate Heir once more. "The auction is starting," he said, his voice now loud enough for the hidden microphones to catch. "Don't get lost, Miss Han. The exits are guarded, and I'd hate for you to find the wrong one." He turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving Ji-woo standing alone on the balcony. Her hand went to her wrist, the skin still burning where he had touched her. She was supposed to destroy his world, but as she watched him walk away, she realized the terrifying truth. She was already a part of it. The music shifted, a low, predatory cello melody vibrating through the floorboards as the auction lights dimmed to a bruised violet. Ji-woo tried to retreat into the safety of the shadows, her pulse still erratic from their exchange on the balcony, but the crowd parted like a dark tide. Do-hyun didn't give her the chance to flee. He was there, a looming silhouette against the ballroom's glow, extending a gloved hand with a silent, ironclad demand. "They are watching," he murmured, his voice cutting through the orchestral swell. "If you leave now, you're not just a guest who felt faint. You're a target who ran. Walk with me." Ji-woo looked at his hand, then up at the gallery where the heavy hitters of the Kangwai syndicate sat like vultures. Her father's voice crackled once more in her ear, faint, distorted static, urging her to maintain the link. She placed her hand in Do-hyun's. His grip was firm, pulling her into the center of the floor where the spotlight found them, stripping away her anonymity. As his hand settled on the small of her back, the heat of his palm burned through the thin silk of her dress. He pulled her flush against him, closer than protocol allowed, closer than safety dictated. The movement was fluid, dominant, forcing her to follow his lead or stumble. "You're stiff, prosecutor," he whispered, his lips inches from her temple. The title was a blade, a reminder that he held her life in the curve of his arm. "Breath. If you can't handle a dance, you won't survive the interrogation room my father is preparing for the mole." Ji-woo forced her muscles to relax, leaning into the danger. She wrapped her arm around his shoulder, her fingers grazing the nape of his neck, feeling the tension in his rigid frame. "Is that what this is? An interrogation?" "It's a test," Do-hyun said, spinning her into a sharp turn that sent her skirts flared like a dying flame. "To see how long you can look at me without blinking. To see if your heart rate gives you away." He dipped her low, his face hovering over hers. In the dim light, his eyes were no longer cold. They were turbulent, filled with a dark, suffocating hunger that terrified her more than his father's guns. For a second, the mission, the wire, and the law ceased to exist. There was only the friction of his suit against her skin and the desperate, forbidden gravity drawing them together. "Your heart," he whispered, his gaze dropping to her lips. "It's racing. Is it fear, Ji-woo? Or is it because you realize we're the same?" "We are nothing alike," she breathed, though her body betrayed her, molding into the space he provided. "We are both weapons owned by men who don't love us," he countered, pulling her back upright with a jerk that stole her breath. He spun her again, his touch lingering on her waist, his thumb pressing into her side with a possessive weight. "The difference is, I know I'm a monster. You're still pretending you're the hero. The music reached a crescendo, the cello screaming a final, jagged note. Do-hyun stopped abruptly, his hand sliding up her spine to the base of her skull, tilting her head back just enough to expose her throat. The ballroom held its breath. For a heartbeat, she thought he would kiss her, a betrayal that would seal both their fates. Instead, his fingers brushed against the hidden pearl in her ear, a touch so light it could have been an accident, yet she knew it was a warning. He leaned in, his nose grazing hers. The decryption is at 40%, Ji-woo. You're running out of time. He released her so suddenly she nearly swayed. The lights came up, the applause of the elite sounding like distant gunfire. Do-hyun didn't stay to bask in it. He stepped back, his expression returning to that of a hollow, beautiful statue, leaving her shivering in the sudden cold. Enjoy the rest of the auction, he said, his voice devoid of the intimacy that had just nearly consumed them. But remember, the next time we dance, there won't be any music to hide the sound of the glass breaking. He turned his back on her, disappearing into a circle of bodyguards. Ji-woo stood frozen, her hand flying to her ear. The earpiece was silent. Dead. He hadn't just touched her. He had severed her only line to the outside world, leaving her trapped in the heart of the wolf's den with nothing but the scent of his cologne and a ticking clock. The silence of Do-hyun's private study was heavier than the roar of the ballroom below. Ji-woo moved through the darkness, the red silk of her dress rustling like a warning against the mahogany furniture. Her hands trembled as she approached the heavy oak desk. Without her father's voice in her ear, the room felt like a tomb, every shadow a potential witness to her treason. She found the safe concealed behind a traditional silk screen. Her fingers moved with practiced, desperate speed, entering the code she had risked everything to intercept. The mechanism clicked, a sound like a bone snapping in the quiet. The door swung open, revealing the red ledger. It was a mundane-looking leather binder, yet it held enough concentrated sin to burn the city's elite to ash. Ji-woo reached for it, her breath hitching, but as her hand brushed the cover, her eyes fell on a stack of envelopes tucked into the side compartment. They weren't financial records or hit lists. They were handwritten, addressed to an orphanage in the outskirts of Incheon, accompanied by receipts for medical equipment and education funds that spanned a decade. The dates matched the most violent years of the Kangwai syndicate's expansion. For every life his father had taken, it seemed Do-hyun had been quietly trying to buy back a soul. It doesn't change what I am, Ji-woo. The voice came from the doorway, low and jagged. Ji-woo froze, the ledger heavy in her hand. Do-hyun stood there, his coat discarded, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to reveal the dark ink of tattoos crawling up his forearms, symbols of the very debt he was trying to pay. He didn't have a weapon drawn. He didn't need one. His presence alone filled the room until the air felt too thin to breathe. "You're late," he said, stepping into the room. The floorboards didn't even creak under his weight. "The decryption finished 5 minutes ago. You should have been out the window by now." Ji-woo turned, clutching the ledger to her chest like a shield. "Why did you let me find this?" "Not the ledger, the letters." Do-hyun stopped an arm's length away. The moonlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows cut across his face, highlighting the exhaustion he masked so well in the light. "Maybe I wanted someone to know that the monster has a bank account for his regrets. Or maybe I wanted to see if the prosecutor's daughter has enough mercy to realize that justice isn't always found in a courtroom." He reached out, not for the ledger, but for her face. His thumb brushed her lower lip, a touch so fleeting and tender it shattered her resolve more than any threat. The power imbalance shifted. He wasn't the captor anymore, and she wasn't the spy. They were just two ghosts haunting the lives their fathers had built for them. "Take it," he whispered, his hand dropping to the book she held. His fingers closed over hers, a soft pressure that felt like an invitation and a goodbye. "Take the ledger. Give your father his victory. But know that the moment you walk out that door with this, my father will know it was you, and I won't be able to stop what comes next." Ji-woo looked down at their joined hands. The leather of the ledger was cold, but Do-hyun's skin was a fever. She could feel the vibration of his pulse, steady and sacrificial. If she took the evidence, she won. Her father would be a hero, and the syndicate would fall. But Do-hyun would be the first casualty of that war, a man executed by his own blood for the crime of letting her in. "Why are you helping me?" she choked out, her vision blurring. Do-hyun leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for a single, agonizing second. "Because for one dance, I forgot I was a Kang." and I think I'd rather die for that memory than live another day in this suit. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, the rhythmic, metallic thud of the syndicate's private security. The handles of the double doors rattled. Do-hyun's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes searching hers for a choice she wasn't ready to make. "Decide, Ji-woo," he hissed as the doors began to groan under the pressure. "The law or me?" The doors to the study groaned under the weight of the men outside, but the world inside the room had gone deathly still. Ji-woo looked at the ledger, then at Do-hyun's face, the face of a man who had just handed her his own death warrant. Before she could speak, he moved. He didn't grab the book. Instead, he seized her waist and lunged toward the heavy velvet curtains, pulling her into the recessed alcove of the floor-to-ceiling window just as the double doors burst open. The crash of wood hitting marble echoed like a gunshot. "Search everything," a voice barked. It was the syndicate's lead enforcer. "The chairman wants the girl found before she reaches the perimeter. If she has the ledger, kill her on sight." Ji-woo pressed her back against the cold glass, her breath hitching in her throat. The ledger was a heavy, cold weight against her chest. Do-hyun was inches away, his body shielding hers from the sliver of light peeking through the curtains. He was so close she could feel the frantic heat of his skin through his white shirt, yet his face was a mask of granite. He reached out, his hand sliding over hers to muffle the sound of her jagged breathing. His palm was calloused and warm, a stark contrast to the icy terror in her veins. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as the flashlights of the guards swept the room, turning the velvet curtains into a thin, translucent veil between life and death. "You think you're the hunter, Ji-woo," he whispered, his voice a ghost of a sound. "You think you walked into my life because your father was clever enough to find a crack in our armor." Ji-woo turned her head, her nose grazing his cheek. The proximity was a physical ache. "I did what I had to do," she breathed, her voice trembling. "For the law." "The law didn't send you," Do-hyun said, and for the first time, a bitter, jagged edge of pain cut through his stoicism. He pulled a small, laminated card from his pocket and held it up in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. It was a photo of her, not as the glamorous woman in the red dress, but as a teenager at her high school graduation, standing beside a man whose face had been violently crossed out with black ink. "I've had this for 3 years. I knew your name before you knew my father existed." The blood drained from Ji-woo's face. The ledger felt like it was turning to lead in her arms. "You knew. I watched you graduate. I watched you take your oath at the prosecution service. I even watched you buy that dress," he murmured, his grip on her hand tightening until it was almost painful. "I didn't let you in because you were good at your job. I let you in because I wanted to see if you would actually do it. I wanted to see if you were as cold as the man who raised you." The betrayal hit her harder than any physical blow. Every moment of shared vulnerability, every lingering look during the dance, every spark of accidental intimacy. It had all been a play. But as she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the triumph of a predator. She saw a devastating, hollow recognition. "You played me," she whispered, a tear finally breaking and tracing a path through her makeup. "No," Do-hyun corrected, his voice breaking. He leaned his forehead against hers, the two of them hiding in the shadows while the men outside tore his life apart. "I gave you every chance to prove me wrong. I gave you the ledger tonight to see if you'd choose the mission over the man who has spent 3 years protecting you from the shadows." Outside, the enforcer shouted, "She's not here. Check the gardens. Block the north gate." The footsteps retreated, the heavy doors slamming shut once more. Silence returned, but it was broken. Do-hyun stepped back, releasing her. The rain began to lash against the glass behind her, a rhythmic, morning sound. "The gate is clear for 60 seconds, he said, his voice returning to a cold, robotic monotone. "Go. Take the evidence. Destroy us all." Ji-woo looked at the ledger, then at him. The truth wasn't just rain-slicked and cold, it was a trap. She had been sent to destroy a monster, only to find out the monster had been her only guardian. "Do-hyun. Go," he hissed, his eyes flashing with a sudden, terrifying urgency. "Before I remember who my father is and take it back." He shoved her toward the hidden service door behind the curtain. Ji-woo stumbled into the dark hallway. The ledger clutched to her heart. She ran, her heels clicking like a countdown on the stone floor. But as she reached the exit, she looked back. Do-hyun was standing in the center of the dark room, a lone figure waiting for the executioner's call. And she realized with a jolt of horror that her victory was the only thing that would kill him. The North Gate didn't lead to freedom. It led to an ambush. Ji-woo had barely cleared the perimeter of the estate, the red ledger tucked beneath her arm like a stolen heart, when the world exploded in a spray of shattered glass and asphalt. A black SUV barreled out of the tree-line, cutting off her path. These weren't her father's officers, and they didn't bear the crest of the Kang-do syndicate. They were the White Tigers, the rival gang that had been waiting for the dragon to bleed so they could feast on the remains. She scrambled backward, the heels of her shoes skidding on the rain-slicked pavement, but a hand suddenly clamped over her mouth, dragging her into the shadows of a stone pillar. She went for the small knife hidden in her garter, her instincts screaming, until a familiar scent of cedar and expensive iron grounded her. "Don't scream." Do-hyun's voice was a jagged rasp against her neck. He was breathless, his white shirt stained with a fresh smear of crimson along the shoulder. He had followed her. He hadn't let her go. He spun her around, pinning her against the cold stone, his body a living shield as a volley of gunfire chewed through the air where she had been standing seconds ago. "The Tigers know what you have," he hissed, his eyes scanning the dark perimeter with a lethal focus. "If they get that ledger, they don't just destroy my father. They erase every witness, including you. Your father's laws won't protect you from a shallow grave in the Han River." Ji-woo looked at the men emerging from the SUV, their faces masked, silencers coughing in the dark. The power imbalance had shifted again. She was no longer the prosecutor with the upper hand, and he was no longer the criminal in a cage. They were prey. "Give me the gun," she whispered, her fingers digging into his bicep. Do-hyun looked down at her, a dark, fleeting amusement ghosting over his features despite the chaos. "I don't give weapons to people who want to lock me up, Ji-woo. I can't run in this dress, and I can't fight with a book. If we die here, nobody wins." Another spray of bullets peppered the pillar. Do-hyun cursed, reached into his waistband, and pressed a heavy, cold semi-automatic into her hand. The weight of it was a confession, a total surrender of his own safety to her. The car at the end of the alley. "It's armored," he commanded, grabbing her hand and pulling her into a sprint. They ran through the downpour, silk of her dress clinging to her like a second skin. Every time a muzzle flashed in the dark, Do-hyun would shove her behind a dumpster or a parked car, using his own frame to block the line of fire. He wasn't just escorting her. He was absorbing the danger, his movements a desperate, violent dance of protection. They reached the alley's mouth, but a tiger enforcer stepped from the gloom, his weapon leveled at Ji-woo's head. Before she could raise the pistol, Do-hyun lunged. He didn't use a blade. He used the raw, unrestrained brutality of a man who had been raised by wolves. He tackled the man into a stack of crates, the sound of breaking wood and muffled grunts lost to the rain. Ji-woo stood frozen, the gun shaking in her hand. She saw the enforcer reach for a combat knife, aiming for the gap in Do-hyun's guard. She didn't think about the law. She didn't think about her father's pride. She squeezed the trigger. The shot was loud, defiant. The enforcer collapsed, clutching his shoulder. Do-hyun stood up, his face splattered with rain and a speck of blood, staring at her with a look of profound, terrifying realization. She had crossed the line. She wasn't just a spectator anymore. She was an accomplice. He bridged the gap between them in 2 strides, grabbing the front of her dress and hauling her into the recessed doorway of the armored sedan. He didn't open the door. He slammed her against it, his hands framing her head, his breath coming in ragged, white plumes in the cold air. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, his voice thick with a mixture of rage and something that sounded like heartbreak. "Now you're one of us." "I saved your life," she snapped, the adrenaline finally breaking through her shock. "Is that what you wanted? To make me a murderer, so I'd have nowhere left to go?" Do-hyun leaned in until their foreheads touched, his eyes burning with a dark, forbidden heat. The rain washed over them, blurring the world into a smudge of gray and neon. "I wanted you to stay clean, Ji-woo. I wanted one part of my life to be untainted by this." He reached out, his fingers trembling as he tucked a wet strand of red hair behind her ear. His touch was no longer the disciplined restraint of a boss. It was the desperate reach of a drowning man. "But you chose me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "And now neither of us is ever going home." From the end of the street, the sound of sirens began to wail, police and likely her father's task force. Do-hyun yanked the car door open, shoving her into the passenger seat before sliding behind the wheel. As the engine roared to life, Ji-woo looked at the gun in her lap, and the ledger in her hands. She had the evidence to end him, and the weapon she had used to save him. The choice was no longer about justice. It was about survival. The safe house smelled of dust and old iron, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of the gala. Ji-woo leaned against the kitchen counter, the hem of her dress torn and darkened by the rain, watching Do-hyun pace the narrow confines of the room. The air between them was thick, charged with the lingering adrenaline of the shootout and the terrifying weight of the gun still resting on the table between them. His phone buzzed, a harsh, rhythmic vibration that sounded like a countdown. Do-hyun stared at the screen, his face drained of color. He didn't answer it. "He knows you're with me," Do-hyun said, his voice so low it was almost a growl. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and raw. "My father doesn't give second chances to thieves, Ji-woo. And he certainly doesn't give them to prosecutors." Ji-woo stood her ground, her fingers curling around the edge of the cold granite. "Then why did you bring me here? You could have left me at the gate. You could have let the tigers take the ledger and me with it." Do-hyun crossed the room in 3 violent strides, stopping so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He slammed his hands onto the counter on either side of her, pinning her in place. The power imbalance was staggering, yet when he looked down at her, his hands were trembling. "Because I can't breathe when you're not in my sight," he hissed, the confession sounding more like a curse than a romantic sentiment. "Because I've spent 3 years watching you from the dark, imagining what it would feel like to finally be the one you're looking at. And now that you are, I realized I'd rather burn this entire city down than let them put you in the ground." The phone rang again. This time he answered. He put it on speaker, and the voice of Kang Do-hyun filled the room, a cold, reptilian rasp that made the hair on Ji-woo's neck stand up. "Do-hyun," the elder Kang said. "The girl is a virus. She has the ledger. She has our names. If you are the heir I raised, you will fix this mistake before the sun rises. Bring me the book and leave her body in the Han. If you don't, you are no longer my son. You're just another target." The line went dead. The silence that followed was suffocating. Do-hyun looked at the gun on the table, then back at Ji-woo. The choice was absolute. His legacy, his life, and his family, or a woman who had been sent to destroy him. Slowly, he reached for the weapon. Ji-woo didn't flinch. She watched him, her breath shallow, her heart echoing the frantic rhythm of the rain against the safe house roof. He didn't point the gun at her. He didn't even check the safety. Instead, he took her hand and pressed the cold barrel against his own chest, right over his heart. "Do it," he whispered, his eyes searching hers with a desperate, agonizing intensity. "If you're going to fulfill your mission, do it now. Because if I walk out that door, I'm a dead man walking anyway. I've just betrayed the only world I've ever known for a woman who lied to me from the start." Ji-woo's fingers brushed his, the metal of the gun a bridge between their 2 warring destinies. The intimacy of the moment was sharper than any blade. She could feel his heartbeat through the steel, strong, steady, and entirely hers. "I can't," she breathed, her voice breaking as she looked into the eyes of the man she was supposed to hate. "I can't destroy you, Do-hyun. Not anymore." "Then we're both traitors," he murmured. He dropped the gun, the heavy metal thudding onto the floor, and pulled her into him. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision of 2 worlds ending. It tasted of salt, rain, and the bitter copper of blood. It was a blood oath, a silent agreement that from this moment forward, they belonged to no one but each other. As he pressed her against the wall, his hands tangling in her wet hair, Ji-woo realized the danger had shifted. They weren't just being hunted by the Mafia or the law anymore. They were being hunted by a fate that demanded a sacrifice, and the first thing they had lost was their way home. A heavy shadow passed the frosted window of the safe house, followed by the unmistakable click of a weapon being readied. Do-hyun pulled back, his eyes narrowing as he shielded her body with his own once more. "They're here," he whispered, his voice turning to ice. And they didn't come to talk. The safe house door didn't yield to a lockpick or a shoulder. It exploded inward under the concussive force of a tactical breach. Blue and red strobe lights cut through the dust, turning the kitchen into a fractured nightmare of shadows. Do-hyun lunged for the fallen weapon, but a dozen laser sights converged on his chest, stitching red dots across his white shirt like a map of his coming execution. "Stand down, Heir Kang," a voice boomed, vibrating with a cold, righteous fury. Chief Prosecutor Han Soo-in stepped through the threshold, his polished shoes crunching on the debris. He didn't look like a grieving father. He looked like a god of vengeance in a charcoal suit. His eyes didn't even flick to the guns aimed at Do-hyun. They were fixed on Ji-woo, who stood shivering behind the man she was meant to dismantle. "Step away from the filth, Ji-woo," her father commanded. The air in the room turned to ice. Now, Ji-woo didn't move. She felt Do-hyun's arm move back, instinctively trying to tuck her behind his frame, even as the snipers adjusted their aim to his head. "Father, listen to me," she started, her voice cracking. "The tigers, they attacked us. He saved me. The ledger is right here, we can—" "I didn't send you to be saved," Soo-in interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying, lethal whisper. He stepped closer, ignoring the danger, his gaze sweeping over her dress, her bruised lips, and the way her fingers were hopelessly tangled in the fabric of Do-hyun's sleeve. "I send a prosecutor. I find a traitor. A girl who let herself be touched by the very blood I spent my life trying to wash off the streets." "He's not his father," Ji-woo defied, her voice rising. The slap was sudden and hollow, echoing off the bare walls. It didn't come from a place of passion, but of clinical correction. Ji-woo's head snapped to the side, the taste of copper blooming in her mouth. Do-hyun let out a low, animal snarl, stepping forward, but the click of 12 safeties being disengaged stopped him dead. The barrel of Soo-in's personal sidearm was suddenly pressed against Do-hyun's temple. "Give me one reason, boy," the prosecutor hissed. "One reason not to end the Kang lineage right here in this dirt." "Father, stop!" Ji-woo screamed, throwing herself between the barrel and Do-hyun. She pressed her back against Do-hyun's chest, feeling the frantic, heavy thud of his heart. "If you kill him, you kill your only witness. You kill the only chance at the red ledger." Soo-in looked at his daughter as if she were a stranger, a stain on his perfect record. He slowly lowered the gun, but the look in his eyes was far more permanent than a bullet. He reached out and snatched the leather binder from the counter where the ledger sat, heavy with the secrets of 1,000 crimes. "You are no daughter of mine," he said, his voice devoid of any human warmth. "As of this moment, Han Ji-woo is dead. Her records are sealed. Her citizenship is revoked. You chose the shadow, so you will live in it." He turned to his tactical lead. "Delete her from the system. If she is seen in public, she is to be treated as an unidentified associate of the syndicate. Use lethal force if necessary." "Father!" Ji-woo's plea was met with the slamming of a car door outside. The tactical teams began to retreat, moving with the silent efficiency of a machine that had just finished its task. They didn't take Do-hyun. They didn't take Ji-woo. They left them in the wreckage of the safe house, stripped of their names, their protection, and their futures. The silence that followed was louder than the sirens. Ji-woo slumped against the counter, the weight of her total isolation crushing the breath from her lungs. She had no home, no law, and no name left. A hand, steady and warm, settled on her waist. Do-hyun turned her around, his expression a mixture of devastating guilt and fierce, territorial possession. He didn't offer words of comfort. There were none left in the world they now inhabited. He simply pulled her into the crook of his neck, his heartbeat the only rhythm left in her universe. "He took everything," she whispered into his shirt, her tears hot against his skin. "Not everything," Do-hyun replied, his voice hardening into a vow. He looked toward the door, where the last of the police lights were fading into the dark. "He left you with me. And he has no idea what a man with nothing left is capable of doing to protect the only thing he has." From the darkness of the hallway, a burner phone, discarded by the retreating tactical team, began to glow. A text message appeared from an unknown number. "The chairman knows you survived. The hunt officially begins at dawn." The cold morning light of the Seoul shipping yards tasted of salt and diesel. Do-hyun stood at the edge of a rusted container, his silhouette sharp against the rising sun. He wasn't wearing the tailored suit of a prince anymore. Beside him, Ji-woo checked the chamber of the pistol he had taught her to use. The red dress was gone, replaced by stolen dark clothes that made her look like a shadow, but her eyes still held the fire of the woman who had once believed in the law. "The ledger is already in the courthouse vault," Ji-woo whispered, her breath hitching in the freezing air. "My father is presenting it to the Blue House in an hour. Once that seal is broken, your father is dead, and my father becomes the most powerful man in the country. There is no middle ground, Do-hyun. One of them wins, and we die in the crossfire." Do-hyun turned to her, his face a landscape of scars and quiet resolve. He reached out, his gloved fingers tracing the line of the bruise on her cheek where her father had struck her. The touch was agonizingly soft, a silent apology for the world he had dragged her into. "They think they're playing a game of chess," he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "They think the ledger is the only king on the board. But they forgot about the pawns who decided to stop following the rules." He pulled a small, silver drive from his pocket. The real data she had mirrored before the physical book was stolen. "This is the final play. It doesn't just contain the syndicate's crimes. It contains the evidence of your father's arrangements with my father over the last decade. It's the rope for both their necks." Ji-woo's hand trembled. "If we release this, there's no coming back. My father goes to prison. Your father goes to the gallows. And we become the most hunted people on the planet." "We already are," Do-hyun murmured. He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing until their tactical vests brushed. The power imbalance was gone. They were two survivors standing on the edge of a cliff, holding the match that would start the fire. "I'm not asking you to be a prosecutor today, Ji-woo. I'm asking you to be the woman who looked at me through that glass and saw a person worth saving. I'm going into that courthouse. I'm going to make sure this upload hits every news station in the country." "You won't make it out," she realized, the horror dawning on her. "The syndicate guards, the police, they'll kill you before you reach the server room." Do-hyun didn't deny it. Instead, he took her hand, his thumb pressing into her palm with a desperate, crushing intensity. "That's the sacrifice. I provide the distraction. You provide the escape. I'll lead them to the East Wing. You take the service tunnel to the server room. You're the only one with the credentials to bypass the firewall." "I won't leave you," she defied, her voice breaking. "You have to," he hissed, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying love. He pulled her into him, his forehead crashing against hers. The intimacy was violent, a collision of two souls who knew their time was measured in heartbeats. "If I go down, the truth goes with me. But if you do this, we break the cycle. We end their war. You were sent to destroy my world, Ji-woo. This is your chance to finish the job." He pressed a final, desperate kiss to her temple, the scent of him, smoke and cold rain, filling her senses one last time. He handed her the drive, his hand lingering on hers for a second too long, a silent goodbye disguised as a handoff. 30 minutes, he whispered, stepping back into the shadows. "After that, the courthouse becomes a tomb. Don't look back." He turned and ran toward the perimeter fence, his movements fluid and lethal. Ji-woo watched him go, the drive biting into her palm. She looked at the courthouse in the distance, a monolith of stone and lies. She had spent her life trying to uphold the law, but as she watched the man she loved disappear into the lion's den, she realized that true justice didn't live in books. It lived in the blood they were about to spill. As she slipped into the service tunnel, her radio flared to life with the sound of frantic shouting and the first cracks of gunfire from the east entrance. Do-hyun had begun his march. He was the lamb led to the slaughter, and she was the blade he had sharpened. The heavy iron door of the server room loomed ahead, but as she reached for the handle, a red laser dot settled directly over her heart. A cold, familiar click echoed in the narrow hallway. "I knew you couldn't stay away, Ji-woo." Her father's voice drifted from the darkness of the server racks. "But did you really think I'd let a dead girl ruin my finest hour?" The server room was a labyrinth of humming black towers and blinking green lights, a digital graveyard where the truth went to be buried. Ji-woo stood frozen, the red dot of her father's laser sight burning into the center of her chest. Prosecutor Han Soo-in stepped into the light, his face a mask of disappointment. He didn't see a daughter. He saw a loose end. "Give me the drive, Ji-woo," he said, his voice echoing with a chilling, bureaucratic calm. "Don't make me add your name to the list of casualties Do-hyun caused today." Ji-woo clutched the silver drive until the metal edges bit into her palm. The sound of gunfire from the east wing was muffled here, but every shot felt like a hammer blow to her heart. Do-hyun was dying out there so she could stand here. "You were never the hero, father. You were just the monster who stayed within the lines." She didn't wait for his response. With a sudden, desperate movement, she lunged toward the main terminal. A shot rang out, the bullet grazing a server rack beside her head in a spray of sparks. Ji-woo slammed the drive into the port. Her fingers flew across the keys, her vision blurring with tears. Behind her, she heard her father's heavy footsteps approaching, the cold authority of his presence filling the cramped aisle. He grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around, his hand tightening into a chokehold. "It's over," he hissed, the barrel of his gun pressing beneath her chin. "Look at the screens," she choked out, a jagged smile breaking through her fear. On the wall of monitors, a progress bar hit 100%. The red ledger didn't just upload, it broadcasted. In the courthouse lobby, in the newsrooms across Seoul, and on the phones of every citizen, the truth began to bleed out. The images of her father shaking hands with Kang Do-hyun, the records of the bribes, the orders for the hits. It was a floodgate that couldn't be closed. Suin's face went ashen. His grip loosened, the gun trembling in his hand as he realized his empire had turned to ash in a matter of seconds. A sudden crash at the service door made them both turn. Do-hyun stumbled in, his tactical vest shredded, his white shirt soaked through with crimson. He was leaning heavily against the doorframe, a hand pressed to a wound in his side, but his eyes were fixed solely on Ji-woo. "I told you, not to look back," he panted, a ghost of a smile touching his blood-flecked lips. Do-hyun. Ji-woo tore herself away from her father, who stood paralyzed by his own ruin. She caught Do-hyun as his knees buckled, her dark clothes soaking up his warmth. The sirens were louder now, real sirens, not the ones owned by the syndicate. The building was being swarmed. For the world outside, the names Han Ji-woo and Kang Do-hyun were about to become the most infamous ghosts in Korean history. Do-hyun reached up, his blood-stained fingers cupping her jaw with a tenderness that defied the chaos. He didn't look at the screens or the fallen prosecutor. He looked at her as if she were the only thing left in a burning world. "We're dead, Ji-woo," he whispered, his breath shallow and hot against her skin. "The records, the names, we don't exist anymore." "Good," she breathed, leaning her forehead against his. "I never liked those names anyway." He pulled her into a final, crushing embrace, his scent of iron and rain finally winning over the sterile smell of the server room. Outside, the tactical teams were shouting, their boots thundering down the hallway. When the doors finally burst open and the flashlights swept the room, the terminal was empty. The drive was gone. The only things left were the glowing monitors displaying the sins of a generation and a single, torn scrap of red silk caught on a server rack. Miles away, in a small fishing village where the neon lights of Seoul were nothing more than a faint smudge on the horizon, a man and a woman sat on a weathered pier. The man's arm was bandaged, his posture no longer rigid with the weight of a crown. The woman leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes tracing the line where the dark water met the sky. There was no glass between them. No fathers, no laws, and no bloodlines. They were shadows in a city of millions, dead to the world, but for the first time, truly alive to each other. Do-hyun reached out, his hand finding hers in the dark. He didn't grip it with the force of a boss. He held it with the stillness of a man who had finally found home. "Where to now?" she asked softly. "Anywhere," he replied, his voice a low, peaceful resonance. "As long as the world doesn't know we're there." They stood together, two silhouettes disappearing into the mist of the morning, leaving the ghosts of the Mafia boss's son and the prosecutor's daughter behind forever. The cycle was broken, and in the silence of the dawn, the only thing that remained was the quiet, terrifying freedom of being nobody. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey. If you enjoyed this story, please do well to subscribe, like, and share with others. Your support means so much more. Until we meet next time, believe in love, follow your heart, fight for what matters to you, and never give up on yourself. See you with the next story. Thanks for watching.